morning. Hey, glad to see you all again here today. Thank you for coming back, and I hope you had a great day yesterday. I certainly did. Great speakers, great topics, and what I've heard from some of you is that different topics. We're hearing about people and challenges and goals and how they overcome them in our industry, which makes our industry stronger because of the speakers and what they do and how they do it. So this has been tremendous. And so we have another tremendous day today. And our first speaker is someone that we've all known for a very, very long time, because he and with Kathy for 35 years produced the best beekeeping magazine in the world, Bee Culture Magazine. And Kim has been involved in associations and president of EAS and what have you. So we would like to turn the next few minutes over to Kim so that he can share with us his journey. So a big round of applause for Kim Flottum.
Good morning. Wake everybody up. Good. Before I start, I got to tell you a story, something that happened yesterday. Does anybody here play the New York Times word games or spelling bees or any of those? The spelling bee yesterday, Kathy and I have become addicted, is that a good word, to these games? And it is not only an addiction, it's a contest. Who can do the best every day? And I got to be totally honest, about 7 days out of 10 she beats me. She's faster and she's smarter and she's better than I am at these games. But yesterday, one of the games that we were playing is Spelling Bee, and Spelling Bee, if you know anything about it, you get a bunch of letters, and you have to make words out of them. And one of the letters you have to put in every word you make. And how many words can you make? And 4-letter words get this many points, 5-letter words get this many points, 12-letter words get all the points. Well, yesterday we both went and we were doing good, and we got to a word that we both got at the same time. And the coincidence yesterday, if you think about this, is amazing, because a word we both got at the same time was journal. So that told me something about what's going on here. A very quick summary of how I got to be standing here today. A long time ago, when I got out of high school, I bummed around for a while, and I started a family, and pretty soon I realized that I probably needed to find a career somewhere, and I had become interested in plants and gardens and greenhouses and things. So I was living in Madison, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin, and they had a horticulture department there that was superb in all of the things that I wanted, and I signed up I started college in the Department of Horticulture. But I had a family, I had to work, and I was looking for a job, and I found a job working for an extension entomologist at the university there, whose job was to answer questions for growers. And these people were growing small fruits and large fruits and turf and ornamental and greenhouses. And I got to thinking, let's see, if I work for him, I can be in a greenhouse all winter and I can be outside all summer. What would be better? So I took the job, and that's exactly what happened. I ended up apples and cranberries and every kind of fruit that grows in Wisconsin, I got to take care of. And what his job was to take a look at all of these plants, all of these crops, what was eating them, and how could you stop it? So I killed a lot of bugs in 4 years, and learned a lot about how to grow these plants, because if the plants didn't grow, the bugs wouldn't come there. So I had to grow the plants, and then I had to kill the bugs. So I learned a lot about basic farming on that job. Well, I graduated, and the job was over that I had, because it had to be an undergraduate student. And I had been working with him on an experimental farm almost in downtown Madison. They had a great big area, apiary in downtown Madison. And I had been working on that farm with them. And so I knew all of the people that were working at the USDA Honeybee Research Lab. That's where the bees were coming from. So I got to know all of those folks for 4 years. Well, my job ended, and almost to the day, the Bee Lab people got a grant, a great big 4-year grant from USDA studying soybean pollination. Well, these were bee people. They didn't know squat about growing soybeans. They needed somebody that could grow soybeans. I needed a job. It worked out really well. And I'm going to bet that everybody in this room has had this experience. The bee lab leader was Dr. Eric Erickson. And I worked there with him for 4 years. But about the middle of the first week I was there, he said, "Oh, by the way, you got to learn how to keep bees because come fall, we're going to need muscle and we're going to need bodies and you're going to have to help." Well, I've been around all of these people and bees for 4 years, and I said, "How hard can it be?" So he said, "Okay, come with me." So he and a technician and I went out, and he opened up. He stood in front of a beehive, and he says, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to open up this beehive, and I don't want you to use any smoke. Go real slow, be real careful, and these are gentle bees, and they won't bother you. And then I want you." I had a veil on and a suit, and I had all the protective gear. And then he said, "Then I want you to put your face down so your veil touches the top bars of this hive, and I want you to take 3 deep, 3 deep breaths." I never looked back. I became a beekeeper. That was the end of I still am a horticulture person, but 3 deep breaths of the inside of a beehive converted me forever. So that's kind of why I got started here. When that job ended, the grant ran out, and I got a job in Connecticut being a farmer. We had cows and chickens and pigs and 20 acres of row crop vegetables. And I took care of the vegetables, and I got to work in the greenhouse in the winter, and I got to be outside all summer. Not a bad job. So I did that for a couple of years, and while I was in Connecticut, I got involved with the Connecticut Beekeepers Association. And they were having some issues with some internal issues and just having some problems. They needed they needed 2 things. They needed somebody to run their newsletter, and they needed somebody to be president. And they all looked at me. "You're a research guy. You can do all this." So why not? So I undertook the newsletter job. And the other thing that was going on at the time was that they needed a president. And the president of the Connecticut Beekeepers Association also served as the director of the Eastern Apiculture Society representing Connecticut. So the first meeting came up, and I had to go to a director's meeting. And I figured, well, I've been doing this for quite a while, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to spread the good word about what Connecticut was doing with their bees and beekeeping. So I took this newsletter that I had been doing, and at the same time I've been working with a beekeeping museum there, and we started a newsletter there. So I took some of those, and I just put them on the table at the director's. Prior to that, John Root had been the first chairman of the board of the Eastern Apiculture Society. When his term expired, they kept him on because John Root's a pilot, and to maintain your status as a pilot, you have to put in a lot of hours every year. I don't know how many, but he had to put in a lot of hours. So what they appointed him to do was to be site inspector. That means somebody from the EAS board had to go to a meeting place next year and see if it satisfied all the requirements that EAS needed to have a meeting. Did it have enough food and parking and dorms and all of those things? So John would get to fly to these things, and he'd get his hours, and the board got somebody who didn't charge him to do that because he was happy to do it. Well, I went to this first EAS board of directors meeting, and John Root was there because he was appointed to the board as a site inspector. And he walked over to the table, and he took a look at there were some other things there. And as it occurred at the time, John needed an editor. And he came over to me and he said, "Did you do this?" And I said, "Yeah, who are you?" I didn't know who John Root was. So he explained his situation, and he said, "I'd like to talk to you. Why don't you come out to Medina?" So coming out to Medina, I talked to the people, the powers that be here, and they needed an editor really bad because John was both living, he was working in the house right across the parking lot here, running the company, and he was also trying to be the editor of the magazine. And he didn't have enough time to do either well, and he was tired of trying to do it that way, so he wanted to get somebody in a hurry. They asked me about 4 questions, "You're hired." here's what I found out after being here for a while is the role of Bee Culture magazine, Cleanings and Bee Culture when it started, made itself clear to me after a while. And what that role made it clear to me was that Bee Culture uses the information generated by the people who know what's going on. They take that information and they make it available. They make it in a format that's understandable by a lot of people, and then they take that information and they give it to all of the people who need it. And it was one of those moments you wake up and you say, maybe that's why God put me on earth, just to take this and do that. And that's what I've been doing for 35 years. So I take information and I give it to people so that they can use it. The reason I'm here today is somebody asked me to do that exact thing. Now, I don't do this anymore. I don't do it the same way. I don't put it in print. I'm going to talk about the podcast that I'm involved in a minute. But what I do now is kind of take a half a step back and evaluate the information that's available and try and figure out who needs it the most, and in a much smaller way, make that happen. That's kind of what I'm doing now. And shortly before I left this job, an old friend from Medina who had moved to Washington, the state of Washington, came and visited. And this is a tech guy. I mean, he knows computers and microphones, and sounds, and amplifiers, all of the things that you need to do this. And we were talking, and he said, "You ever do a podcast?" So he explained it to me, and I immediately saw the connection between taking from here and putting over there. And I said, "Yeah, let's try this." And that was a little over 4 years ago, and it seemed to be working. We find people who have information that have trouble getting it out to the rest of the world. We take that information and we let them tell you what they know. And it has seemed to work quite well. It's quite popular. A couple of years ago, Jim, too, and I put our heads together. And you know one thing that happens at a beekeepers meeting? There's a speaker up here telling you all the things you need to know or want to know, or all the things that the speaker wants you to know. And in the back of the room, or even more common, out in the hall, there's a bunch of beekeepers really telling each other what to do. And that's where the meeting is most of the time, right? The people out in the hall, people out in the parking lot, people at the restaurant. Well, we wanted to try and duplicate that. I mean, we had this podcast where we had experts talking to people that they had studied to help. But we didn't have the out in the hall thing. So Jim and I sat down and we decided that let's try it and be out in the hall. So what we started doing is sitting out in the hall, and it's two guys sitting out in the back of the room, two guys sitting at the cafeteria, whatever you want, talking about something bees. And you've done I'm going to bet everybody in here has done it at least once, probably hundreds of times. You get to talk, how do you do that? How do you make that happen? Where did you get this stuff? Why did you do it that way? That's the kind of questions we want to ask beekeeper to beekeeper. And Jim and I have known each other over 30 years, and we can pretty much do that pretty well, I think. We think. So that's the other half of what I'm doing now. It's called Honeybee Obscura, all things honeybees, and then Beekeeping Today podcast. And because of that, somebody about a month ago asked me to give a talk. They wanted to know about adulterated honey. And I got to thinking, well, this is something there's a whole bunch of people over here know, and a whole bunch of people over here want to know. How can I make this happen? But it's been 2.5 years of Zoom, right? So I had to think about this for a minute. How can I stand up in front of a bunch of people and do it? I haven't done this in 2.5 years. This is the second group. I did the first group last weekend, and this group here this weekend. I haven't done this in a long time. So bear with me. How's that? So that's how I got to where I am today. All of that background stuff that got me to talk to you about adulterated honey. Why should there be adulterated honey? Why should adulterated honey exist, I guess is my question. Why does the world want or need adulterated honey? And basically you can see from this graph what it is. It's in the US, honey production has been about the same for the last 10 years or so, and consumption and demand have gone up. You got this much honey, you got this much demand. The difference has to be met somewhere. So people have been doing a lot of importing. At the same time, people who are exporting honey to the US figured out something. We can make honey. We can give our beekeepers all of the equipment you need, and they don't need land to make honey. You don't need to own a lot of land, so there's no cost there. We can give them cheap equipment, and they can make honey. We can take that honey and do stuff to it, and still sell it cheaper to the U.S. than the U.S. is selling, or the U.S. beekeepers could sell it to U.S. consumers. And basically that's what's happening. There's been a bunch of countries that have looked at this situation and said, okay, this is what we can do, and that's why they're doing it. It's an economic dilemma for the U.S. because of what all I don't. Brett 80 runs the biggest beekeeping operation in the world, I think. He's running something in the neighborhood of 50,000 colonies, somewhere in there, the last time I talked to him. And what Brett 80 told me not long ago was what the price he had to have for a pound of honey had to be the same as a gallon of diesel for him to stay in business. 3 years ago, a gallon of diesel fuel was what, 2 and change? Today it's 5 and change. So you can see the problem commercial beekeepers are having to stay in business when they're competing with 2 and change honey. The numbers here, there's way too many numbers here, but basically we produced 170 some pounds, 170 million pounds of honey last year, and we imported 147. I mean, that's the difference right there. And I can show you even more here. Basically, imports 471 million pounds at $1.44 a pound. This is 2021. $1.44 a pound. Produced in the U.S., 134 million at $2.40 a million, $2.41 a pound. That's half of what Brett 80 needs to stay in business, and that's 4 times as much as the imported honey is going to cost. It's not a contest. Well, it kind of is. But this is the basics of why imported honey is adulterated. Is that it's cheaper to export from a foreign country to the U.S. because a lot of the U.S. doesn't check their honey. There's a lot of information in this picture, way more than you're going to be able to absorb for a while, I think. But basically, what it's telling you all the ways you can adulterate honey, and you can lie where it came from. You say it came from Oregon, but it really came from the Ukraine. You can lie about how we processed it. We didn't heat it, we didn't filter it, but yes, we did. You can lie about all sorts of things from the source and from the initial production of honey. And then you can lie about, we took really good honey and we substituted and blended it with really cheap honey. So you can lie about that. And then you can lie, all the ways you can look at this. And then on the far side over there, you can see all the kinds of sugars add to this. You know the worst thing about adulterated honey? By 10, it doesn't kill anybody. Nobody dies from adulterated honey. If they did, people would be concerned, right? But they don't. So people come, yeah, well, it's sugar, it's sweet, it tastes okay. And I got better things to do because there are people dying from stuff over here. If adulterated honey killed people, we'd have fewer customers. But we'd get a lot more attention if adulterated honey at least caused some harm. But it doesn't really cause harm to the ultimate consumer. I'm going to bet that 9 out of 10 people in this room can't tell a pound of honey that's 2/3 high fructose corn syrup from a pound of honey that's pure honey. Am I right? I can't. I've tried it. It's sweet. It's sticky. It's a little bit lighter in color than the stuff that I make in my bees, but it's sweet and it's sticky and it tastes like I kind of think it should taste. That's the problem with adulterated honey, is people can't tell. There's a bigger problem. A bunch of years ago, 2019, the federal government came out with what it's called the CID, a commercial item description for honey. And whenever, anytime the federal government buys anything, whether it's a chair for a meeting room or a tank for the army or whatever they buy, it has to have this critical item description. They have to tell you exactly what this item is, all of the parts and pieces and processes that went into making it what it is. And they have one for honey. And it came out in 2019, and we have yet to adopt it. I'm not sure why. That's the frustration of information, getting information from people who know, people who need to know, and I can't get that information. It's been, 3 years now? That hasn't happened. But all of this tells the U.S. what honey should be. And this is a law. This is, if you're going to sell something to the U.S., you have to, what you're selling has to meet exactly what the CID says. But nobody's comparing it because nobody's complaining. If 10 people died from adulterated honey, this would suddenly become important. There are people looking for adulterated honey. And the first thing you think about is the FDA, but drug. Well, the Food and Drug looks at some stuff that comes in. They don't look at anything that's produced in the U.S. And so if you're coming in from overseas, but they're only running one test. They only run one test. We're going to get to this. There's four basic tests you can run tests for honey for adulteration. They're only running one, and it's the least complicated, least expensive, least time consuming. Surprise, surprise. So the FDA, but they do look at the CIT, and if we adopted the CIT, then their role would change in this place. They would have to start running these tests. They would have to start looking very hard, and that's where we're running into the federal government tells another branch of the federal government what they want to do. They're not going to give them any money to do it. Surprise, surprise. So FDA is looking at it. There was a group called the Honey Integrity Task Force a while back, and they did a really good job. And then they broke up. They didn't quite break up. There's still some structure to this group that says maybe we could get back together. But what they found was basically most of the honey in the U.S. was clean and most of the imported honey wasn't. Surprise, surprise. But now we've got some data. They looked at honey from all countries and honey from all of the major packers in the U.S. They didn't look at your honey or my honey, but they looked at the major packers. Most of the U.S. was clean, and most of the imported honey was, surprise, surprise. U.S. honey packers do a fair amount of testing, probably more than anybody else, but it's still not a whole lot. But a lot of the way that U.S. packers look at, they may know you as a beekeeper. I've been buying honey from you, and I bought it from your dad, and I bought it from your granddad, and it's always been good. Yes, we'll do business. I'll give you this much a pound, and I know it's going to be clean, right? And the beekeeper says, right. And then you suddenly have a bargain, and it's been a tradition. There's a legacy here, and it's usually almost always clean until the next generation gets into business sometimes, and then that tradition may take a blow. But when you need $5 a pound for honey and you're getting $2.50 a pound, that's a challenge for that next generation. I think you can probably see that. They also look at people they don't know. A packer gets a contract from General Mills or somebody and needs a whole bunch of honey, and they're gonna find new customers. They're gonna find new beekeepers, new packers, or new producers that can supply them this honey because the regular people can't do it. And they test this new beekeeper's honey, and darn if it isn't not quite as good as it should be. There's some sugar syrup of some kind in there. We're going to talk about the tests that you can look at, but there's 4 tests, and it costs about $400 if you're going to do all 4 tests. And how many barrels are you going to test? When you've got 2 semis load of honey, how many barrels are you going to test to make sure that all of this honey clean. You check the first one in the first truck, it's clean, yep, you're good. What about the last one in the last truck? That's where the problem runs in here, is that sometimes packers get fooled. But if they turn that load down, if they test that first barrel and they find out that there's 15 or 18% high fructose corn syrup in that barrel, they're going to turn down that whole load. What happens to that whole load? I'm betting it doesn't go down a drain someplace. All right? Somebody somewhere is going to go, absolutely. But I'm only going to give you $2.50 a pound for it. And the beekeeper is going to go, it's better than pouring it down the drain, right? So that honey is going to go someplace. And too often it goes to, I tell you, the biggest, by far the biggest market for honey that's got a problem is in what they call ingredients. Honey nut Cheerios. Think of that. Could you tell if the honey on Honey Nut Cheerios is all honey? No. And that's the market for this honey. Those people are going to pay $1.50 a pound for this stuff in barrels, and somebody's going to take $1.50 a pound because it pays for, at least it pays for the gas for me to get here to there and back again. At least I'll break even on the gas. I'm not making anything on the honey, but that honey is going to go someplace. In the ingredients market where it goes. So you go back to that honey task force group. Almost all of the imported honey is dirty and almost all of the U.S. honey is clean. The honey that's dirty, the honey that's imported, guess where by far the majority of imported honey goes. It's not on a bottle at your local Walmart, but maybe it is. You know, that guy that got that load of U.S. honey from that U.S. beekeeper, he wanted to put it in a bottle. There's a drugstore downtown. And we were in there, I don't know what, Kath, a couple of months ago, and we had to wait for our prescription to get filled. And I'm looking around, and I go around a corner and down this aisle. This aisle is here to the street, and it's all groceries. This is a drugstore. It's all groceries. And I'm looking around. There's a whole shelf full of honey. Why is honey always on the top shelf? It's on the top shelf. And I pulled one down, an 8 ounce, 12 ounce bear, no country of origin. The producer was a company name, not where it was located. I mean, there was basically no information on the label. This is a 12 ounce bear for $1.50. Yeah. Is this honey imported? Is this honey clean? Is this honey any good? Would you buy this honey? Yeah. That's the problem. Because people who go in grocery shopping in drugstores don't care. They're looking at price. Right? So that was very eye-opening to me. Have you heard of the Codex? Codex is a global initiative for people who produce all sorts of things, food primarily, but all sorts of things that meet minimum requirements. Tires, stainless steel, food have basic requirements they need. You have to have this much of this and this much of this and this much of this to be called stainless steel. All right. Well, one of the ones that they've got looking is honey. There's a global standard for honey, sort of like the CIT that the U.S. is trying to put in place. It's a global standard, and they're adamant about what it has to cover. It has to have source, and it has to have sugar content, all of the things that honey has to have. They're adamant that it has all of those, and it's voluntary. It's a standard. You can say, okay, how crooked am I? The one thing that I also wanted to, that I found out that I also wanted to bring to light was a lot of the honey that's produced in foreign countries that comes to the U.S. The beekeepers aren't the people who are adulterating it. The beekeepers are pretty square shooters. It's good stuff. They put it in a barrel and it goes to an exporter someplace downtown, and they did their job and they did it right, and they feel good about what they did. And that exporter takes that barrel and he cuts it in half and puts it in some kind of sugar syrup. Now here's the trick. Those 4 tests that I talked about, some of them, I'm not a chemist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not an organic chemist by any stretch of the imagination. But basically, there's 2 kinds of sugars. There's sugars that have a C3 compound, 3 carbons that make them up, and sugars that have a C4 carbon compound that have 4 carbon sugars that make up the sugar. And now you know as much organic chemistry as I know. But these tests look for C4 or C3 sugar. Some C4 sugars, corn, and all of those kinds of plants are C4. The rest of them are rice and wheat and all of those kinds of plants. The most expensive one can get C4 and C3 together down to about 5%. You can adulterate your honey about 5% and nobody will pick it up. But if it's 20% or 50%, so there are some tests, the one that only does C4, if you adulterate it with C3 sugars, it isn't going to pick it up. It isn't going to know. Same thing with C3. Here's the thought. And they found this to be true. A lot of the importers in the U.S. have found this to be true. They will go to a Chinese beekeeper and they will test his honey and get samples of it and bring it back. Then they follow that honey that goes from that beekeeper to that exporter. And lo and behold, when it comes out of the exporter, there's some level of adulteration. The other half of the equation is that an U.S. importer will come to a Chinese exporter and say, I need 9,000 barrels of honey, but it's going to get tested by the people in the U.S., and the Chinese exporter will go, which test are they going to run? C3 or C4 or both? I can give you that much sugar that will pass the C4 test. The honey that will pass the C4 test. Deal. So the honey gets adulterated over there, shipped over here, tested. Yeah, it's clean. It's good stuff. Goes into, and it's honey nut Cheerios. So, the National Honey Board, of course, has developed some standards, and they are looking and encouraging people to not do a lot of what's being done. But they have only so much authority and so much reach and so much influence, so they do what they can, but they don't have an enforcement arm. There is an enforcement arm out there, and I hope people here have at least heard of True Source Honey. That's an industry organization. There's like 600 members, and they're importers and exporters and beekeepers and shippers, and the whole beekeeping industry has some influence on this group of people. And they not only are testing at the border, we're testing at the importer in the U.S., they are going over to the exporter and taking his honey, and then they're going to the beekeeper and taking his honey to see if the same honey that's produced in that hive is the same honey that arrived in a barrel on this loading dock. They're tracing it all the way back. The other thing that they do that I really like, that I think is important, is that they will hold you to your word. If you say, I am importing my honey from that exporter, and when it comes in, they test it, they can tell if it came from that exporter because they already tested that exporter, and they can tell if you're telling the truth. The True Source is, like I said, it's an industry group. It's voluntary, but because if I'm an importer or an exporter, I can get certified by the True Source organization. And I, as a user of honey, am pretty confident that if I have that stamp of approval on that barrel of honey, I'm pretty sure what's in it is what it says is in it. And it has changed a lot of what's going on in terms of retail adulteration. They will tell you off the record, and they may be sworn not to name names, but they will tell you off the record that half the honey that comes into the U.S. is adulterated. I'm sorry, half the honey that's used in the U.S. is adulterated. And it's because of the stuff that comes in from primarily Asia. The stuff that comes in from South America is pretty clean because they know that they're going to get tested. They know that most of the South American exporters know that the North American importers don't trust them. So it better be good. The Asian beekeepers can't figure out what's going on, and all of the Asian exporters know that it's going to get tested. That way they're going to slant the test and slant what they're adding to. I don't know what you can do about this. I don't know what we can do about it. The only thing that really is know that when you're looking at $1.50 for a 12-ounce bear, know that it's probably not honey at all. And then tell everybody you know. Label your honey so that people can know where it came from and can know who produced it and can know what's in that bottle. And then let's get together and talk to the federal government to get the CID passed and get all of the other adulterated problems that are going on passed so that the federal government has some authority and some heft that they can stop this from happening. Because Red A, you can't go on forever producing honey, selling honey at $2.50. So I've taken what I was able to find out. I'm hoping I'm sharing it with people who can use it, or at least share it with other people who can use it. And that's all I have. He wants to know how you can get your honey certified, and I'm going to be right off the top. Start with the true source people. You probably don't have barrels and barrels of honey to sell every year. Maybe you do, but even if you're selling it 60-gallon pails, you can get as a producer, certified as a producer. There's a cost. It's not free, but if you've got true source honey certification on that 60-pound barrel, you've got better honey from a user's perspective than one that isn't. So I would start there, and they will give you directions to go to find that. The federal government isn't going to give you any help.
Well, we have some honey here, and we're going to test Kim's idea just to see how it goes.